All right, sir. Welcome to everybody. Just want to go ahead and get started with this fifth iteration of the Joe Talks, and we will get started. Yes, we'll go ahead and get started now. So this is Lieutenant Colonel Brett Lee, formerly with ACPA LA, in the middle of a transition between ACPA LA and my next assignment in the 82nd Airborne Division. But we're doing our Joe Talks with Colonel Abadie of the Army Futures Command, focused on Project Convergence. For those of you who have not been on before, ACPA LA started this back in February as an opportunity to reach out to the entertainment industry, creative professionals, to inform them on Army operations, missions, initiatives, and people who serve in our uniform, and also to inspire them to tell our story. We then created Joe Talks to reach out in a virtual space due to the inability sometimes of getting people to come out to the West Coast, and so we've been doing this now for 5 months now. So today's topic is looking forward, future warfare, and how the Army is preparing for future conflict. And so who we have with us today is Colonel Dre Abadie, who is a co-lead for the Army Futures Command's Project Convergence operational planning team. He's a 1996 graduate of the U.S. Military Academy, originally from Lafayette, Louisiana, and commissioned into the Signal Corps. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Engineering and many master's degrees in Information Assurance, Government Information Leadership, Military Art and Science, Strategic Studies, and a PhD in Information Technology, Management, Security, and Assurance. He's had many assignments, of course, most recently with the 311th Theater Signal Command and the 1st Cavalry Division, including a tour in Afghanistan most recently. So welcome, Colonel Abadie, to Joe Talks.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. And look, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk Project Convergence, and I appreciate that ACPA LA put this together. It's a great opportunity because I'm getting to talk about my passion. So you mentioned it. I benefit from being part of a really special team that works at the headquarters of Army Futures Command in Austin, Texas. I'm currently coming to you from the Pentagon, though. I'm in the nation's capital right now. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is something that I'm passionate about, and it's really because it's kind of a product of my childhood. So, growing up, we imagine these things about curiosity. It's about learning. So like some kids, I wanted to play Army. Like some kids, I liked science experiments and blowing things up. And so it's really amazing to have that kind of energy as a child, and this idea of curiosity and discovery, and then being able to do it professionally. And I'd also say, it's kind of humbling to hear about the degrees, but I'm actually a product of the benefits the Army provides. So throughout my career, and it's been 25 years now, the Army has been incredibly generous to me in terms of offering opportunities for education, for me to continue to learn, and those things culminate in what I get to do right now for Army Futures Command. So before I start talking, if we could please play the video.
Yes, sir. Hoping this is going to work.
As the Army looks to the future, one thing is certain: a combined joint force operating across all domains, air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace, is essential for our national security. Project Convergence is a campaign of learning designed to aggressively pursue an artificial intelligence and machine learning-enabled battlefield management system. Because whoever can see, understand, decide, and act first will win, and winning matters. The Army is demonstrating new technologies as often as every 2 weeks. With these emerging technologies as the foundation, Project Convergence demonstrations will consist of multi-domain operational environments where the Army will demonstrate artificial intelligence and networked lethality capabilities that augment human sensing and decision-making on the battlefield. Project Convergence is designed around 5 core elements: people, weapons systems, command and control, information, and terrain, guiding innovation, and our ability to support the joint kill win. People are the foundation of everything the Army does. We must have the right people with the right skills and training in the right roles to succeed in complex environments. The Army is integrating into the Joint Staff-led Joint Warfighting concept. The Army developed Project Convergence to enhance combined joint all-domain command and control, and focus on 4 key topics for modernization: sensor integration, effects integration, applications, and data. The Army's signature modernization efforts give our soldiers the weapons they need to be the most lethal and effective force in the world. Linking these efforts in a joint learning environment allows the Army to act faster and more decisively than any adversary. With increased speed and sensors comes a need for the next generation of command and control capabilities. Investments in mission command systems that emphasize centralized intent and decentralized execution. The Army must leverage information and data at scale, in near real time. Project Convergence is empowered by artificial intelligence and machine learning to employ all sensors, the best shooters, and the right command and control nodes faster than any adversary will face. Finally, these 4 elements work in concert, but must be correctly positioned at the point of need to enable joint effects and achieve overmatch. Simply put, terrain matters. Through experimentation and learning, Project Convergence helps ensure that the Army has the right people with the right systems appropriately enabled in the right places to support the joint fight. That campaign of learning in action is the inaugural Project Convergence 20 demonstration held at Yuma Proving Ground. Critical to the capstone event was the opportunity for the Army's most senior commanders to see how Project Convergence will shape the way we fight future conflicts and what we will fight with. As we plan for the future, Project Convergence will fully incorporate the joint force in 2021 and our closest allies in 2022 to ensure we remain unified against any threat. Project Convergence, a campaign of learning measuring our future capabilities against a future threat as we seek constant improvement on how we train, organize, and equip our people, while ensuring decisions can be made in real time with capabilities placed strategically around the world. Thus ensuring continued security for America and her allies.
All right, sir.
All right, thanks. So, so what is Project Convergence? If I could offer a theme, it's the Army's approach to really trying to understand how artificial intelligence, robotics, and autonomy can change how we fight in the future. And as I was kind of preparing for this opportunity to talk to you, I started thinking about, okay, what movies covers artificial intelligence? And the track record is really not very good. You immediately think of Skynet. We think of robots who kill everyone. Even RoboCop, went off that edge. And so I was thinking to myself, I was like, you know what? No, I've seen a movie. If I remember correctly, Eagle Eye was really good about AI that gives statistics, because that's what we're talking. We're talking about using these technologies to inform our leaders. And so I watched Eagle Eye this weekend. And exactly like I remembered, it started the movie, the AI gave statistics, analysis, and really informed the leaders before they made a decision. Unfortunately, the leaders made a decision the AI didn't agree with, and then the AI went over to kill everyone. So it didn't really fit in the end, and that's unfortunate. But the takeaway is we're trying to leverage technologies in a meaningful way to resource our leaders for success. And there's a couple of ways of looking at that. From a practical standpoint, if you consider the idea of combat, one of them is how do I use artificial intelligence to find threats, to find targets? Where's the enemy? How can I engage the enemy and protect my force? Another way to kind of consider AI and this idea of autonomy and robotics is how can I get these elements doing the dirty, dangerous jobs that I don't want my soldiers to do? So, if you watch movies about combat, let's just say like Vietnam, we were always most concerned with the guy who was called the point man. He was the one walking in front of the squad. And unfortunately, generally, he was the one who triggered the booby traps and not a very high success rate. But an incredible, important job. And within that squad or platoon or whatever the formation was, the point man was actually probably one of the most important members of the team. So it's this idea of how can I take artificial intelligence robotics to kind of change the way we see risk, and now have a robot go out there at the point of danger, and then see things and pass them back to the command post, and we prevent our soldiers from being in that desperate harm way. It's the same way with, if you just imagine, these ideas of storming the beaches of Normandy and breaching these obstacles, and a lot of these things that are just, horrendous aspects of war and combat. How can we leverage these technologies to do that? That's a really important aspect. Another piece of this, and this is a technical term, so just, I apologize up front, but it's the idea of cognitive burden. And what it means is a combat leader in the future is going to have so much information coming at them. And how do they process that information? How do they make sense of it? And how does it inform their decisions? And so this idea of reducing the cognitive burden, we use from an artificial intelligence standpoint, it's the idea of decision aids, decision engines, to crunch all that data, if you will, process that information, and then propose things to the leader. And so as we bring those three things together, what we're finding in the Army is it all gets into this idea of data and how do our boxes talk to each other? How do our weapon platforms talk to each other? How does that information get shared? But more importantly, how do we take a combat leader who's forward and ensure that he or she has the most relevant information necessary to their mission and has the most capable tools and systems to support their success? And it's a really interesting way of how do we bring that together. And so what we do for Project Convergence is we kind of take existing technologies from our labs. So the government has science and technology labs where our workforce is generating solutions, whether it be basic or applied research, and then they start to build and prototype things. And what we do is we try to bring that out we used a Yuma Proving Grounds out in the desert, and we just kind of conduct an exercise, if you will. We do something that an operational unit would do, and therefore we can start to see how well these prototypes work. How well do we need to change them? For Project Convergence 20, we're really just focused on doing things faster. And so how fast can I get the target? How fast can I engage the target with an artillery piece, with a UAV, with a machine gun, all those different ways of doing it. But how do I accelerate this idea of going from that sensor that finds the bad guy to the shooter that engages and protects the force? And so that was kind of the attempt, and it was really just about us doing things faster by leveraging these new technologies. As we go into this year, Project Convergence 21, we're going to continue that same path, but we're going to look at other things. It's not just about, how quickly can we engage a target. We're also going to look at how well do we sustain the force? How do we resupply missiles and rockets? We're going to look at how do we do this concept of an air assault, where soldiers come into a helicopter and they go to take an objective. We're using technologies, it's called IVAS, the Integrated Visual Augmentation System. But just think of some of the Microsoft technologies where you're wearing these big goggles, or a visor even, and it's augmenting your reality. So for a soldier, that system might be telling it where the threats are. That system, as you're in flight in the helicopter, maybe it's a 7-minute flight, maybe it's a 10-minute flight. In the past, the soldiers were on the helicopter and they had no idea where they were going or what was about to happen. So for the 10 minutes they were in flight, they don't know if the situation changed. They don't know if the enemy, came. They don't know any of those things. Now with these technologies, throughout the entire flight, the soldiers can see where they're going. And therefore, the minute they hit the ground and they assault the objective, they're that much more prepared for what they're going to engage in. And so it's those opportunities to really leverage technologies in the hands of soldiers that's important. And it's ironic, Brett, that you're going to the 82nd. The 82nd is one of the centerpieces of Project Convergence. Between the 82nd and then the Army's multi-domain task force, we're bringing units and soldiers into our experimentation to let them inform us in terms of how well this stuff works. We don't want to work these IVAS goggles and wait to give it to a soldier when we say it's ready to be bought. We want to give it prototype, and then let soldiers tell us how well these things work. And so Army Futures Command has this idea, it's a principle of soldier-centered design. And as often as we can, we iterate on prototypes, and we allow soldiers to inform our leaders' decisions of the things we're going to buy to field that future force. And that's kind of really the special sauce in terms of what we're doing, because it's the American soldier who truly understands what needs to be done in combat and truly understands what they need to have in their hands or at their left and their right in order to do the things that we need to do in a future fight. And so we're relying very heavily on those units to come out, not only see if they might end up breaking things, and that's great, that's what the Army does, but more importantly, they're going to give us, their insights, and that's pretty much invaluable. A big theme for us for Project Convergence 21, this is a joint force entity, so I don't want, I am sitting here as the Army, but we're privileged to have collaboration from all of our service partners. So the Air Force, the Marines, the Navy, everybody's on board for us to do these things together because, look, the Army doesn't fight alone. That's just a fact in terms of what we do. So, we're bringing not just Army technologies, but joint technologies to these experiments in order to see how we fight together, and more importantly, to see how we can potentially explore new ways to fight in the future. How do we integrate in a novel manner? And then that way we can share that with the leadership here at the Pentagon and the Joint Force. And then moving into Project Convergence 22, I said we don't ever fight alone and we fight as a joint force. We also don't ever fight at home. And so we're going to be somewhere in the fight supporting America's interests. And so we're going to start looking at coalition partners and understanding how we would fight with our coalition partners. And more importantly, how do our technologies integrate with each other? Because we're going to be fighting somewhere. And what we've seen, not just the last 2 decades, but much longer than that, we always have a coalition partner at our side in the fight with us. So that's the next big piece that we're going to look at in Project Convergence 22. But that's in a nutshell, Brett, and just like to turn it over to you.
No, thank you, sir, for the opening. That's great. I will say for our attendees, if you have a question, put it into the Q&A box. I'll be able to see that. So, sir, if you could explain, we have this great power competition going on now and for many decades. How is the Army's concept of a future conflict in a great power competition? How is that framed by multi-domain operations? Like, how is multi-domain operations different from the way that the Army, 10 years ago considered a great power competition? If you could sort of explain just the framework that Project Convergence is operating in a multi-domain operation battlefield.
Yeah, so I'd start off with just saying, as a disclaimer, as we design experiments and we plan these things, we remain grounded in the operational problems we're trying to solve. And so last fall at Yuma Proving Grounds for Project Convergence 20, we attempted to replicate part of that multi-domain operations sequence. And I'm sure not everyone in the audience understands this stuff, but we use terminology like penetrate. How do we initially go into that danger zone, if you will, and penetrate it? And then once we penetrate, how do we disaggregate, which is just a term of saying how can we confuse the enemy? Can we present dilemmas to them in order to provide our opportunities to go further? And so as those windows of opportunity are created, then we exploit. And this is where we kind of see ground maneuver and the things that the Army does well in terms of exploiting those opportunities. And so those are terms from our multi-domain operations concept that we want to follow, because if we envision that concept of how we're going to fight, then that's how we're trying to structure the experiments. Now, to answer your question, first off, I don't know 10 years ago how much we were even considering great power competition. We were pretty entrenched in counterinsurgency, and in all honesty, from a professional culture standpoint, that aspect, the way it shaped our leaders, and the way it shaped our processes in terms of how we fight, is a challenge we have to overcome. Because what's different in terms of how we frame multi-domain operations, to answer your question, is speed and scale. And so this idea of great power competition, what is going to be different is the speed at which we fight and the scale. And so you can see literature out there, a lot of people kind of harken all the way back to World War II in terms of the type of fighting it'll be. It'll be larger formations, et cetera. Now, where the fight occurs will probably shape some of the dynamics. But I think the base premise is of us just saying, hey, we have to do things faster, and we have to do things with some level of simultaneity that we're not currently used to. That gives us a guiding post for going forward.
Oh, thanks, sir. That I think it is a complex thing to understand. For those of us in the Army, we sort of harken back to the pre-coin era. We would talk about air-land battle, And so this, multi-domain operations has been compared to air-land battle with a couple of extra domains. Could you just sort of, for the audience, just explain what we all mean by domains and how you use a word like convergence on those domains, what that actually means in practice?
Yeah, so the Department of Defense defines the warfighting domains as being land, air, sea, space, and cyber. And so, some of it, there's traditional thinking, so if I think land, I think Army. If I think sea, I think Navy. If I think air, I think Air Force. We have a Space Force now. There's not necessarily a cyber force, but there's a very large cyber command that helps us prosecute through that domain. The idea of convergence is how can we integrate effects across all those domains in terms of whether it means leveraging one domain to present a dilemma in another domain. The other piece is really, and I think the challenge we're going to find as a joint force is how do we do command and control across all those domains simultaneously as we conduct operations, because you'll hear the term joint all domain because that's how the joint force sees us fighting. And if we're not leveraging all domains and to some degree with some level of simultaneity, then we're probably not optimizing the way we're fighting. And so that's what they mean. It's easy, air, land, sea, space. Cyber is a little quirky, but incredibly valuable and truly probably going to be fundamental in the future fight.
So the enemy obviously has a say, sir, and obviously we have the caveat that we're not speaking on any kind of policy. But how has the development over the last 20 years of enemy capabilities informed the way that we view a future battlefield in the way that we are approaching multi-domain operations?
So, from a general sense, and I love to read about this stuff, there's this idea of we can't hide anymore. And then I think if you take that, and I'm sure there's going to be exceptions to that, but if you start with that assumption, it'll shape the way you decide to fight. If you think that, this, I'm trying to think of the right word, just the surge of different sensors out there, whether it be microsatellites, all these technologies that are sensing, and that are available to all nations. I think really what's changed over the course of time is it's not necessarily a great nation state with some massive economy that can purchase some of these technologies. There's a lot of things now that the cost is so relatively cheap that almost anybody can do it. That's what posed us a lot of problems in terms of counterinsurgency, but I think it'll have similar problems if a future fight turns into some level of a war of attrition. What we do from a project convergence standpoint, though, is we almost compulsively try to make sure we're being threat informed. And so since everything I talk about, lends itself to data and it lends itself to communication networks, what we try to do is break those things. And how do I understand when the existing network I have will break from a performance standpoint? And then more importantly, can I replicate an enemy activity and break the network through that to see how well I understand that impulse? But from that threat standpoint, it's also about, it's one more measure of success for the technologies we're trying to deliver to the force. And so if we think the enemy has a capability and the technology cannot operate under those conditions, then we probably shouldn't be investing in it. And we're trying to maintain that recognition that, like you said, the enemy has a vote and the enemy can fight. And therefore, we need to shape that into our experimentation as we make decisions going forward.
But you alluded to that earlier, sir, when you said you're talking about speed and scale. I guess the scale and scope of warfare is growing exponentially. And that is informing the development of weapon systems as well, with even longer range artillery effects being developed. How is that shaping theater strategy in the way that you all look at it with the idea of anti-access area denial? How is Project Convergence help to understand how to even get to the fight to begin with?
Yeah, so I would, from reading literature, editorial pieces, when we have these conversations, it kind of sometimes gets into parochialism. where there's roles that are well understood, but that may not be the way going forward. Project Convergence doesn't get into that. That's not really our focus. What our focus is this idea of optionality. And so what I'd like to be able to demonstrate to a joint force commander somewhere in the world, that now you're not limited to that one weapon system to engage the target. You might have 3 weapon systems. One's Army, one's Navy, one's Air Force. And at that point, you have options, and then the decision can be what best fits your operational scenario, what best fits the way you fight the force. And so when we're doing experiments, it's this idea of novel joint integration. Can I do something? Can I bring elements together in a way that maybe wasn't currently envisioned? And by doing that, I'll have the opportunity for a commander in the future to have some options in terms of how they prosecute the force. And we want to inform those discussions. So even if it gets parochial later on throughout the processes that the DoD has, that's fine. I mean, that's our culture as a profession. But what we want to offer is, hey, we learned something in this experiment. Hey, look what this F-35 can do. Hey, look what this Aegis cruiser can do. Hey, look what this new Abrams tank can do. Watch what they can do together. Wow, we didn't know that. And let leaders make decisions, or really let the community have very professional dialogue about potential for changing the way we fight in the future.
Thanks, sir. You mentioned, obviously, artificial intelligence and autonomous capabilities play a huge role in Project Convergence. And we actually, our last Joe Talk was with Dr. Cook at West Point, talking about the development of artificial intelligence. It's a fascinating discussion of where AI is headed in the future. Where do you all see, Project Convergence 35? I mean, how do you see AI progressing into the integration into how we fight in the future?
So a lot of the ways that we look forward to things like 2035, in a way, it's trying to understand, and this is beyond just AI. This is really science in a way. Trying to visualize what a moonshot might look like, and then allow the scientists, the experts, to kind of walk us back in terms of what scientific breakthroughs have to occur to get to that point. A lot of our conversations on the AI side specifically begin to devolve into technical considerations. And so it's this idea of computation, specifically computation at the edge. Can I have the right computer systems in order to process all that data? It gets into this idea of how do we bring data together in meaningful ways? And a lot of that is probably going to be things that we're not even envisioning right now. The 82nd Commander talks about a single pane of glass. And how do I bring a single common operational picture that all these systems feed into and allow that leader to have one view, one single pane of glass? And that gets back to that comment I made earlier about cognitive burden. And so a lot of what we look at is artificial intelligence, again, to this idea of increasing speed, this idea of reducing the cognitive burden on our leaders, and this idea of identifying threats to the force faster in order to protect the force, in order to provide that commander a little more time to maneuver as he goes through threats.
Well, and speaking about AI, you kind of alluded to this with the movie Eagle Eye. So, what, just from your viewpoint, what do you see that Hollywood gets right about near future conflict, and what do you see that they get wrong? I mean, obviously, you haven't seen everything, but movies such as Terminator and Edge of Tomorrow, films that are integrating technology into future warfare. I mean, where do you think that they're hitting on things that look like what we will actually be doing?
I think some of the stuff is interesting when they talk about, I would just say like accessibility to technology. So if you think of things like the TV show 24, all of a sudden, Jack Bauer is on his own, he's out there, and boom, on his phone, he can bring up satellite imagery of wherever he's sitting. I think things like that, whether they can happen now or not, I'm not 100% sure, but I do think we vision that as being what's necessary. A lot of our efforts is pushing capabilities as far to the edge as possible, enabling a tactical commander with as much capabilities as possible. And so, I talked about this proliferation of sensors. That's going to continue. And so I would hope that a commander in the future will have a handheld device that he or she can start tapping into to see things that today's commanders wouldn't think is even possible. And so I think some of those things are right. I think when it's escaping me the name of the movies, but some of the ways that they show robotics from an augmentation standpoint, whether it be carrying loads, et cetera, is quite accurate. At least, in terms of the way we're already trying to do it. But yeah, again, if we just move past the AI killing machines, I think we'll be closer to the way the Army sees the employment of artificial intelligence in ethical manners.
Yes, I think everybody always goes to Skynet, like immediately when you talk about artificial intelligence. That's like the boogeyman. Skynet takes over the world, and we all end up being in the Matrix. So obviously, one of the things we hit on the last Joe Talk was just how organizationally future warfare is going to radically change the way the Army and the Joint Forces structured. Because some of the things you're alluding to are taking soldiers away from the tip of the spear and replacing them with autonomous capabilities. Do you all, obviously Project Convergence is just one aspect of this, but do you see that we will continue to remove soldiers from harm's way and replace them with autonomous capabilities? How far do you see that progressing, if that's the way it's going?
I really hope so. I think, the bigger issue is, can we do things that are lighter, smaller, cheaper? I don't think, again, Dre's opinion here, that we're going to necessarily replace soldiers. I think what we're going to do is we're going to allow soldiers to focus on more important things, specifically things that humans do best. The other thing I think we're going to see as we go forward is all this technology that I'm talking about. A lot of it is software based. And so when we're doing experimentation and we're evaluating things, it's kind of about, okay, what am I going to fight with in the future? How am I going to fight? And then how am I going to organize for combat? And this idea of organizing that I think you're hinting at, it turns into a talent management discussion. And so with Project Convergence last fall, we had this really interesting, so it was a magical activity in the sense that it brought soldiers, civilians, and scientists together in the dirt, and it was like 128 degrees. It was a miserable experience, but very focused on solving the problems, very focused on taking a technology that might not have been quite ready to go, but we thought it had promise, so we brought it, and then working to make it better while we're out there. And so we had this one instance, one box didn't talk to another box, and a leader walks up and says, "Hey, I want those two things to talk to each other." And the answer was, well, they're not designed to do that. Well, can you do it? And you give the people in the Army a challenge, they rise to the occasion. And so I want to say it was about 48 hours. They coded and fixed the software to do what that leader asked for. And so one of the takeaways we had was, this idea of doing software development, it's well understood in industry. It's somewhat understood in the Army, but it's going to be absolutely critical in that future fight. Because in the future fight, if the scenarios change, if the conditions change for that commander, for them to have soldiers that can get in, can code, can change the systems to replicate what's needed for battle is absolutely critical. So at Army Futures Command, we stood up the Army Software Factory, and we're starting to kind of harvest some of this talent that is in the Army. The soldiers are there. Now they might not be doing that for the Army. They might be a truck driver. They might be a cook. But when they're at home, this is what they're passionate about. And so the Army Software Factory is getting the opportunity to bring them into what they're passionate about and allow them to apply their unique skills into this new idea of what we think is going to be a requirement in the future. And so soon we're going to start to build that bench of talent. And that is the aspect that is going to be necessary, I think, in the fight. That's the things that AI can't necessarily do. And we're going to need that new idea and new respect, to be honest with you, for the talent that the soldier brings to the fight.
I think you're right on track there, sir. I mean, I think it's a fundamental shift in what we're looking for in soldiers. We're always going to need certain types of soldiers to do certain types of jobs, but we're really expanding the aperture of who can contribute to the Army fight. And like you said, somebody who grew up coding could be an essential warfighter for the Army mission. And I think from the new Army marketing campaign, the recruiting campaign, they really sort of tapped into that idea that we have there's a lot of talent out there that is going to contribute to may not have considered in the past. So you talk about the acquisition of new technologies. I mean, do you see that we are the state of the art, the changes as threats are evolving, that, like you said, being able to recode something on be an essential part of how we fight in the future, being able to be that quick in changing when it's necessary to change?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think this is one of those moments where it's going to be more than technology. There's some culture that we're going to have to overcome. There's a level of trust that needs to come both in the technology and then in the soldiers that'll bring these skill sets. I think when it comes to the acquisition of technology, you'll find I would say an overarching theme that's shared amongst the Department of Defense, as well as the Army and the other services, that we need to find ways to do this faster. And for the most part, the limiting factor tends to be some level of bureaucracy. Some of this bureaucracy exists for all the right reasons, but when it comes to these technologies, what they're doing is they're not giving us this opportunity to field them and put them in the hands of soldiers at the same pace that we think the threat is developing. And so this will be something that will kind of be a consistent push across the board, but it's more than just the technology. This gets into how do we operate as a profession? How do all our processes work? That's business processes as well as warfighting, and therefore, I'm always confident leaders will stand up, leaders will make changes. What we need to do, what Project Convergence needs to do, is experiment, find the hidden gems, find that emerging technology, show that it works, collect data to prove that it works, and then allow our leaders to accelerate it and get in the hands of soldiers faster. But it all starts with that initial experiment and that demonstration of what's in the realm of possible and what we could do.
Yeah. So going back to the discussion on enemy capabilities, sir. I mean, obviously, open source format we're in here, but what is it about the enemy threat that Project Convergence is most worried about addressing, just from a general sense, that the capabilities they can apply to us that we are most concerned about?
Well, I think most enemies are concerned about. I mean, I think they have two concerns. I mean, from a technology standpoint, it's how we command and control, and this idea of can they neutralize our command and control systems. I think they're also bothered about just the power of the American soldier, the leader. We have leaders that can, operate under this idea of guidance and intent. We have leaders that can take initiative, and so there's some things that I think the enemy realizes they can't necessarily target. But I do think, and there's plenty of stuff in the media about other great powers talking about AI specifically, in terms of how the first nation to, whether it be master artificial intelligence or really just unlock the potential of it, will potentially shape the future. And we can just only hope that whatever nation that is has some guiding principles that allow them to do it in the appropriate manner that's ethical.
So as a public affairs officer, I have to talk about information. So how does information as a warfighting function play in this war when information is global now and can reach a combatant before they even consider deploying troops anywhere? What role does information play in multi-domain
So, I think, and again, this is my personal opinion. I think information plays a role of us maintaining the trust of the American people. So how accurately we can present what's actually happening at whatever location. But I do think we're going to need to identify technologies that can help us better understand, if not at least recognize, disinformation. And it's that disinformation campaign that some of our other competitive nations seem to openly engage in, that is problematic. But there's likely to be tools that will at least allow our leaders to understand it's happening. In terms of how do you mitigate it, how do you stop it, et cetera. That's a more interesting discussion, and probably not for this forum. But that needs to be weighed heavily because of the damage it can do.
And speaking of how they're using this information in new dangerous ways, what over the last 20 years we've been focused on a counterinsurgency era and counterinsurgency operations. What has changed about our near-peer adversaries that is now being addressed in Project Convergence over the last 20 years in their use of technology?
I'm not sure we're doing a lot on the information side. We are experimenting with this idea of non-kinetic effects. So the things that can happen in cyber, the other things that don't involve blowing things up, because we express deep concern with the idea of collateral damage, and what can occur. But on the information side, I don't think Project Convergence as an entity is really exploring that. That's more, and we'll see. I mean, if there's again, like I said, if there's a technology that allows us to better identify disinformation as it's occurring, that'll be critical. That would be the kind of thing that would be important to a commander. Because again, like I said, we don't ever fight at home. And so therefore that disinformation can be incredibly dangerous for the coalition partners that we're relying on, or whatever host nation might be involved. But at this time with Project Convergence, I wouldn't say we're really tapping into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have one question asking about software, how it can be protected from hackers. I know you're not a cyber guy necessarily, but is that a potential threat, and what might be the threats to the future if we're not focused on counterinsurgency? We're just looking at the threat of hacking in.
Yeah, so I would refer to that as a persistent threat. I mean, that's not stopping. From my experience when it comes to cyber, we have this, and the movies glamorize this as well, is there's some kid in his mom's basement with a hoodie and he's hacking your computer. I think what reality tells you is a lot of the hacking tools are publicly available. They're fairly cheap, and they're automated. And so it's really about a guy pushing a button and then coming back later to see what he caught. And so we deeply respect the fact that is a persistent threat. It's happening all the time, 24/7. And so as we're designing software, and you'll hear this term DevSecOps, but it's where the developers, the security folks, and then the operational folks that are going to actually use the software are coming together in a meaningful way to iterate solutions. And the reason it's DevSecOps is because the security piece cannot be left out. It's just absolutely too important. And it gets even more critically important, at least in our eyes, when it comes to our weapon systems, and the things that more and more are again becoming software driven and digital, if you will, in nature.
Well, we certainly very recently seen the strategic impacts of hacking with the Colonial Pipeline, and certainly those kinds of persistent threats that are sometimes nuisances, but sometimes can be very damaging, are going to continue in the future. So you see that as some component of the enemy's anti-access area denial will be a hacking component of that to hack into command and control systems.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the cyber domain, a lot of it also gets back to the cost, and that cost is not always monetary in nature. It's the cost of taking an action that involves, back to your comment about information. So I'm going to do something now, and now on the information space, it brings risk to whatever I've just done because of the way it exposes me, the way it portrays me, et cetera. And I think that's a part that we can't lose sight of either.
Looking forward, sir, you mentioned Project Convergence 21, the focus. What can you speak specifically about the technologies that you're looking at in 21 and going forward, what you can foresee in 22?
I can't go into depth with a lot of the technologies, but I'll give you one that some people kind of take for granted, unless you're a soldier. There's a technology that if you've seen the movies and you see a soldier medevac, and sometimes it's this hoist that goes down, and so what actually happens is as that hoist is being raised to bring the soldier up, it spins, and that spin is I mean, just imagine if you're the soldier, you're already not in a good shape, and so now this thing's spinning like crazy. So there's a technology that is a hoist that doesn't spin, and that's an opportunity to make a difference, for a soldier. So we're excited about that. But most of the other stuff that we're doing, unfortunately, it's not really appropriate for this net, and it just gets after the things I talked about. It's about, how do we do everything faster? How do we see? How do we understand? And then how do we act? And really, so it's well over 100 technologies, and it's not just Army technologies. It's joint technology. So each of our partners is bringing something in order for us to get that meaningful contribution.
Well, you never ask a question you already know the answer to, I guess, but I'm assuming that the soldiers take very kindly to this technology. They probably are sort of geeking on it, as they would say.
Well, so I think, from not necessarily that hoist, but some of these like this IVAS, some of the soldiers are pretty excited about the way it's changing, and that's why we're just happy that the multi-domain task force and the 82nd Airborne are coming together with this, because they're the octane to this experimentation. Again, it's let me find an organization that has some degree of imagination, who fights. That's what their profession is. But I'm going to give them something. I'm going to say, hey, this can do this differently. You don't have that right now. How would you use it? And then you allow the genius of that commander, the imagination of his or her staff, to come up with new ways to fight. And that's really what we're on. It's not, what could we do in the future? And that's what's really necessary.
So, sir, if you can explain to us how Project Convergence fits in the grand scheme of all the Army exercises that are done every year. I mean, obviously, COVID put a wrench in all of that, but where does it fit in all of the other large-scale Army exercises that are conducted?
Yeah, so Project Convergence is going to be the centerpiece for the Army going forward. It's a campaign of learning, so this isn't just, we're not just doing it this year, next year. The leaders have kind of expressed this. There's probably going to be a decade-long event, if not longer. So that campaign of learning also drives what we call a unity of effort. So for all those other experiments, all the other things that we're doing in the modernization space, Project Convergence kind of gives you that central azimuth to kind of bring things together in a meaningful way. And we do that because we want the outcomes of all those other things to contribute to what we're learning in Project Convergence. When I say a campaign of learning, I truly mean to learn. And so we're looking at it that way. It's got support from Army senior leaders, and it's got support from our joint partners. And so we're just excited about the opportunity it gives us, because we do need to act now. We do need to bring these technologies to the force as soon as possible to ensure they're ready for that future fight.
It's awesome, sir, and I mean it's really exciting to view this going forward and to see the focus that the Army has placed on modernization. I mean, obviously standing up a 4-star command, first time in 40 years to address modernization. It just shows the emphasis that the Army is placing on preparing for the future. Well, sir, pending any other questions, I'm really glad that we got the opportunity to speak with you about this topic. It's something we keep coming back to because we find that the entertainment industry, they're always trying to figure out what things are going to look like. There's a lot of futurists out here trying to figure it out. And so we keep coming back to this topic of future warfare. And I think this definitely helps us to be better informed about what future conflict will look For our audience, I'll say that we will have this recorded. It is on our YouTube channel so that everybody can view it if anybody was going to be calling in but didn't have the opportunity. But so I'll leave you an opportunity for any final comments that you may have.
No, so Brad, I just want to say again, thank you to you as well as to ACPA LA. Thanks to whoever not only is who's on now, but who might be watching this video in the future. It's a privilege to represent Army Futures Command, and so for me to have the opportunity to talk about the things that I enjoy doing every day is just a sheer privilege. So again, thank you for the opportunity, and look forward to any future discussions.
Thank you, sir, and thanks for everything you're doing over there at Futures Command. We will probably be running into each other pretty soon as I take over over there at the 82nd Airport. So I'm sure we will be meeting again.
All the way.
Yeah. So that's it for our Joe Talks. Actually, personally, my last Joe Talk. It's been a thrill doing these. Really enjoyed it, and very excited for where Joe Talks goes in the future. This is another great example of how we can connect the Army with the entertainment community, because we understand the value and the impact of what entertainment media has on the American public, and helping them to better understand their Army. So anything that we can do from our seat to try to help the American public better understand the Army, we are more than willing to do it. So thank you, sir. Thanks again. And thank you for everybody attending. Take care.